For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Welcome back to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with a spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long-distance trails where every section is a new beginning. Our guest on the podcast today has hiked over 29,000 miles and is still counting. He started his avid hiking career in 1984 by thru-hiking the Appalachian Trail, but soon realized that section hiking was more his cup of tea. He has section hiked the entire Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and is currently sectioning the Pacific Northwest Trail and Arizona Trail. He says people like to go hiking with him because he's a meteorologist and spent 30 years working for the National Weather Service. Please welcome with me to the podcast, Chris Burke.
Hello, happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm excited to get into your 29,000-mile avid section hiking career is what I'm calling it. But I want to go back before we even get going into those additional miles. Your first hike was a thru hike on the Appalachian Trail, and I want to address something. It's amazing to me that you actually hiked the entire AT and never took on a trail name. So, Chris, talk to us a little bit about that and what happened.
Well, I have to say, in 1984, it wasn't that unusual, but certainly by 2020, it seems like everybody has some sort of trail name. Except me. I have always thought that I am the same person on the trail as I am off the trail, so I just use my regular name, Chris Burke.
I love that. So does anybody ever ask you, like when you're out on, you've hiked over 29,000 miles, so you have to have been asked before.
I have been asked many times, and I've even had some people try to give me a trail name, but none of them have taken, and I'm still Chris Burke.
Well, you know what, Chris? I really love that. You've stuck to your guns. You're Chris Burke. You've got thousands of miles under your belt, and I think it's great. So after your thru hike, you made some major decisions in your life. You decided that you were going to move west. You decided you wanted to become a meteorologist. So I'm very intrigued about this meteorology thing. So talk to us about what drove you to make that decision and the whole move west.
Well, I always wanted to move to the west. It seems like this is where the real wild country is in North America. And it definitely is better hiking out here. When I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, that was kind of my farewell to the east. I moved later that year to Seattle, Washington to go to graduate school, and I have never looked back. As far as being a meteorologist, I have noticed that there are basically two things people say after their hike to describe their hike. They either say it was great, or they say it was pretty good. And invariably, the hikes they say were only pretty good were actually in the rain.
Oh, yeah.
When it's sunny, the hikes are great. When it's raining, they're pretty good. That's about right. But I want all my hikes to be great. So I had to learn how to forecast the weather. It also made a nice living for me. But every hike I go on now, practically every hike, is in great weather. And people actually want to go with me because the weather always seems to be good when I go hiking. I like to put it down to mostly skill, but in fact, it's mostly the West Coast, which has really great weather, especially in the summer.
Well, most definitely, Chris. I want to go hiking with you because I want to go hiking in the greatest weather and I want to go hiking at the best time. And especially when I can't even believe I'm saying this on the air, when maybe I bid farewell to the east and finally get out, somewhat permanently and start hiking those gorgeous West Coast trails that you have so much accessibility to. So really looking forward to that. Another intriguing thing, so you through hiked the AT, you didn't get a trail name, and you're good without having a trail name. You decided you want to move to the West and become a meteorologist. And you also decided that section hiking was more of your style. And in 1990, you started section hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. So tell us a little bit about why section hiking works for you and your style of hiking.
Well, let's face it, through hiking is not for everyone. If you have a job or a career or a family or any other sort of thing that is a draw on your time and attention, it's very hard to go through hiking, at least not without quitting your job or leaving your family. So I had a job, I had a career, and I could really only hike on weekends and on my vacations. So section hiking sort of made sense. As I did more of it, though, I realized I liked it a lot more than through hiking. There's a lot more flexibility. You don't have to hike for 6 months straight, get up every day and hike. I mean, really, through hiking is like having a really hard job that doesn't pay you anything and actually costs you money. And you have to do it 7 days a week. For some people, that's fine. But for me, I like the flexibility. I like the idea that I don't have to go hiking every day, that I can do something else if I feel like it. If it's raining, I don't have to get up and walk into the rain. And if I'm just not feeling it, I can stay in town and go out to eat.
And one of the things first of all, I really value your opinion on that because you have through hiked. You through hiked the Appalachian Trail, and then on the reverse side of that, decided that section hiking was a better fit for you because you did have a career and so on. But one thing that you said you didn't want to be miserable. So expand on that a little bit.
Well, right. I have met quite a few people who, though they would never admit it, they appear to be miserable on their through hikes. They're quite dirty, they're very tired, and they're not actually enjoying it in the way that I enjoy it. It seems like after maybe 3 weeks or 2 months or some period of time, through hikers stop seeing scenery. They don't even know where they are half the time. They're just walking on this path as far as they can go. And they're doing that in bad weather. They're doing it when it's really cold. They're doing it when it's really hot. And to me, hiking is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be my vacation. It's supposed to be what I do to enjoy myself. So
right.
I skip all those parts and just have fun. Basically, my section hikes of the CDT and the PCT were pure fun. I hardly had a bad day out of all those thousands of miles.
Well, that is a perfect lead into, I want to talk about your section hiking of the PCT and the CDT, but I'm going to take a little bit different approach. I want to ask you some specific questions about each hike, but I also want you to share with us, since you are a meteorologist, your weather tips for each of the trails and the best time to hike. So let's just start off with the PCT, which is the Pacific Crest Trail. So when did you start section hiking and when did you finish?
I started, as you said, in 1990, and the last year was 2002. So that's 13 separate years. I would have finished in 2001, but 9/11 happened while I was out hiking.
Oh, wow.
And after a few days of that, of continuing to hike, I was with a friend at the time, and we both decided that we just wanted to go home. So we went home, and I finished my hike in 2002. As far as the weather of the PCT, it is definitely the trail with the best weather. You can hike the entire PCT and hardly ever be rained on if you go the typical time, say April through September. The weather on the West Coast in summer is fantastic. It's sunny, it's warm, it's not too hot. Now, me as a meteorologist who was section hiking, I can only remember one day of the whole PCT in those 13 years where I got rained on. Just one day.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty fun. It was like the third day of a backpacking trip I was on in the Sierras. And so I couldn't actually leave and go to a hotel that day. I had to actually take it and get rained on. But that was okay. The next day after that was the best day I had on the PCT. And we can talk about that later, perhaps.
Yeah, that is amazing. So sticking with the weather real quick, since we've already gone into that, what would you suggest for a section hiker or anybody that wants to hike on the PCT? Obviously, you've only got rained on once. So if I want to come out there, when is a good season? When is it good for me to stay out of that snow and kind of, try to plan something on the PCT, maybe in the Sierra section or in the sections that are more known to have snow?
Well, let's back up just a second here. And I'd like
Sure.
to point out that section hiking allows you to hike in way more seasons. It's not just the high season that you go on these trails if you're section hiking. So, for instance, spring is the best time to go in Southern California. That's 600 or 700 miles of trail that you can hike in the spring. You really can't hike in the high Sierras in the spring. And people do rush up there and immediately encounter deep snow and have to take various actions. I don't like hiking in snow. But if you wait until August or September, there won't be any snow in the high Sierra. It's absolutely glorious, in fact. And even if you go into the fall, you can still day hike almost anywhere in the mountains, both the Cascades of Washington, Oregon, and the Sierras. So it's basically a 3-season hiking trail if you're not through hiking.
I like that. That's a very good explanation in the way to look at things. So let's back up just a second here because I love this. Your total mileage completed while you were section hiking was what?
Let's see. For the Pacific Crest Trail is 4,372 miles. And this is for a trail that is actually 2,650. So I did almost 2,000 miles more of hiking in order to accomplish a section hike of the PCT.
So explain that a little bit.
Right, sure. The reason is I did not simply do end-to-end hikes section by section. Quite a few of my hikes were out and backs, but the main way I got the big miles done was by walking giant loops that happened to take in a portion of the PCT. I did this in the Washington Cascades, the North Cascades, and also in the High Sierra. So while doing those portions of the PCT in the High Sierra, I also happened to hike the entire John Muir Trail, and I happened to hike a good portion of the Sierra High Route, which I heard a previous guy talk about on your podcast. It's actually the Sierra High Route, not the Sierra High Trail.
Yeah, I think we got that wrong. So sorry, I apologize to everyone now. I blame myself, the East Coast, who doesn't know that it's actually called the High Sierra Route. So my apologies on that, 100%.
That's okay. That was definitely the highlight of my trips. That's how I kind of ended the last 3 or 4 years of hiking the PCT. I spent a month in the High Sierra hiking on trails and off trail and extremely high country, and very rewarding every moment. And the weather was perfect, of course. That is where I had my best day, which was crossing Forester Pass. And I should put pass in quotes because it's over 13,000 feet high. It's barely a notch in a very high ridge. And then walking across the Bighorn Plateau to the south of Forester Pass. That's where I really understood that the Sierra Nevada is the range of light. as John Muir called it.
Wow.
It was astounding. And then to finish the PCT in 2002, I saved up the last bit. I finished with a flourish. I walked through the Southern Sierras, finishing the last bit where the Mount Whitney Trail intersects the PCT. So I got to that intersection and I was done with the PCT. And then I walked out over Mount Whitney down to Whitney Portal. I think it's about a 7,000-foot descent from the summit of Whitney to the parking lot. I dashed that off in an afternoon.
Now that sounds amazing. I mean, I literally have chills by you saying that. I mean, now that's a way to finish a trail, for sure.
I agree.
For sure.
I have fond, dreamlike memories of that whole area.
And just so everybody knows, he's really smiling. So I could see it right now that, I mean, that day is flashing in your mind. And I'm not sure if I even have to ask you this next question. Do you have a favorite section of the PCT? I don't know if you just told us or not, but do you have another favorite section?
That's right. It's Forester Pass, the Bighorn Plateau, and the Mount Whitney area. There are a lot of good parts of the PCT. In fact, I could go on and on about any portion of it. You know, everyone has the idea that you need to go to the real wildernesses, to the national parks, and that's where the best scenery is, and that's where you'll have the best time. There's kind of a paradox with the well-known wildernesses versus just the general forest out there. It's true, the wilderness and the national parks are well protected, but they're also where all the people are. You will never feel like you're in the wilderness if you're passing other backpackers, every hour, every half hour. There are a lot of people in the parks and the wildernesses, the famous ones. It's in the general forest, outside those areas, places where people have barely even heard of, let alone gone to. That's where you get the real feeling of wilderness. So I'm thinking of areas of far northern California, when you do a big circumnavigation around Mount Shasta, all through general forest for the most part, and portions of Oregon, and even in Southern California, where you're walking through desert conditions. You never see anybody, not even when you're crossing roads, not even roads in the distance. You never see anything. And it really feels wild in those places too. So I recommend every inch of the Pacific Crest Trail.
Well, you've sold the deal on me now. I mean, we've had people on that are section hiking the PCT, and every time I go, I have got to get out there, but I have got to retire from the East Coast first. There's this job here that I got to make sure I take care of, but I will definitely get out there. So let's move on.
Look me up when you get out here, Will.
I will 100%. Yes. Let's move on to the CDT, just kind of similar fashion. So when did you start section hiking the CDT, and when did you finish?
That one I started right after the PCT. I started in 2003, and I finished in 2017 for a total of 15 years of hiking.
Wow. And the same thing as the PCT. Your total mileage was a little bit different for section hiking. So your total mileage for the CDT was what?
4,021 for a 3,100-mile trail.
And go ahead and explain that again.
Well, I'd like to think that I really got my section hiking method down on this trail. I walked quite a bit of it as day hikes, walking one way between trailheads and then bicycling back to my car on roads.
Explain that. So you would drop the car, ride the bike, or ride the bike. Explain your process there.
Right. So I would drive to a trailhead with my bike in the car, and then I would take the bike out and I'd bike to a different trailhead from that first trailhead, and then I'd walk back to my car on the trailhead. After a while of doing that, I realized that I actually preferred doing the biking first, because after a long, full day of strenuous hiking, I was sometimes not thrilled to be greeted by my bicycle.
No. I'd be worried about that all day. Like, oh my, when I get back, I still have to ride my bike.
Yeah, I ended up riding into the night several times, and that wasn't so great. Also, there's a fair amount of biking up to the Continental Divide, which is as hard as it sounds. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. You might want to do that part first. Do the biking first, and then you start walking, and it's like a relief.
So Chris, what you're saying is you don't get enough from just the hiking. You gotta do the bike. And one of the cool things about this is your approach to the CDT is when you get to a town, you not only wanted to section hike on the CDT, but you wanted to take advantage of everything that was around the town too, right?
That's exactly right. So there's more trails than just the CDT. There are other trails, trails up to lookouts, approach trails to the CDT, other approach trails that leave the CDT. That's basically how all my hiking went. As with the PCT, there were some big loop hikes I did, and there were some, true end-to-end section hiking I did. But I did a lot of day hiking on the CDT, which is a little bit strange. I think most people think the CDT is the true wilderness trail, and it's the most remote, and that you can't day hike it. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can day hike a lot of it.
Well, I'm excited that you're telling us this.
More than
some
half
people
of it,
may
I would
not
say.
be, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and then of course, when you're in town, you don't have to just hike all the time. You can do other things. You get to, first of all, you get to sleep in a hotel. You get to eat at restaurants. You get to go to the brewery.
All pluses.
You get to do a lot of things. Get to, maybe bike around town a little bit. Sometimes the towns have bike trails. Sometimes there's a museum that you can go to on a rainy day. It's just a great way to get to know the whole area, not just the line of the trail that you're hiking.
And like you said before, I mean, you're on vacation, so you want to take advantage of everything you can in the time slot, that you slated for yourself to be there. So I really appreciate that. Do you have a favorite section of the CDT?
You bet I do. It's the Wind River Range of Wyoming. It's not as well known as most of the places on the CDT. It's just southeast of Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton National Park. And it's like night and day. In those national parks, there's traffic jams on the roads. You will never be alone on a trail. And unfortunately, Yellowstone did burn down 30 years ago, so it's not the most scenic place on the CDT. But the Wind River Range, by comparison, is empty of people. It has a huge trail network, and you go very high through very wild country. There's also a Wind River High Route, just like there's a Sierra High Route. And I barely touched that, and I want to go back and get on that.
Is that going to happen? You going to make it happen, Chris?
Well, we'll see. If I ever get out of quarantine here, I will definitely go to the Wind River Range.
Oh, my goodness. All right, let's get into the weather tips for the Continental Divide Trail, because now when I think CDT from someone from the East Coast, the first thing that comes in my mind are thunderstorms, lightning, and things like that. So dispel the myth.
Oh, it's no myth. The CDT is different from the PCT. The PCT has wonderful weather all the time, at least to 0th order. But the CDT is different. Now, the northern part, Wyoming and Montana, Idaho, is generally dry in the summer, similar to the West Coast. But it's really dry, so much so that fires are a problem every year, especially lately. The last decade or so, there have been a lot of fires. In fact, I would say since 1988, the Yellowstone fire year, there was kind of a step change in the climate of the interior West. And there are just really bad fires every year now.
And I hate that. I hate that.
Most thru-hikers have to deal with at least one fire on their trip. And by deal with, I mean skip that part of the trail, go around somehow, either walk around it or be driven around it. I mean, you just can't get through a fire. That's the northern part. Then New Mexico is very good hiking in the spring. April and May are glorious months. It's dry, and actually fires can be a problem in New Mexico in May if it's dry enough. It's Colorado that is the problem state.
Uh-oh.
Because it has deep snow in winter, which lasts into July, just like on the West Coast. Here's a trivia question. I'm going to ask you a trivia question.
Oh, no.
Here we go.
I'm not good at trivia.
Well, it's not really trivia. This is trail.
Well, okay, there you go.
What is the date of the deepest snow in the mountains of the West? When is the snow on the ground the deepest? What date?
Okay, this is a trick. So I'm going to go July 1st.
Well, okay, it's only a little bit of a trick. July 1st is not correct. But
Okay.
it is April 30th. So
Oh.
April 30th. So you're well into spring down in the lowlands. Trees have leaves, birds are flying around, and lambs and fawns are gamboling. But you go up in the mountains on April 30th, and there's 20 feet of snow on the ground. You can't even get to the mountains. The trailheads are completely buried. The roads are not open at all. So you have to wait until July to get into the really high country of the West. That's the Sierra, the Cascades, and the mountains of Colorado.
I guess unless you like to ski. I don't even know if people are skiing up there and that stuff, or snowshoeing.
A few people have done. It's funny because it seems like a lot of the CDT thru hikers are gung-ho Easterners. They come out here in April, or they come out to New Mexico in April, and they rush through New Mexico because, gosh darn it, this is a desert, and I can't wait to get to the really great high country. And so they reach Colorado in May, and there's 20 feet of snow on the ground, and it's essentially impassable. And it's actually kind of shocking to see what happens. People do all sorts of things. They walk around at lower elevations on Forest Service roads. This is through what is, in summer, the best part of the PCT. And they're walking around it on Forest Service roads. Or they skip ahead to somewhere and walk in, say, the Great Divide Basin of Wyoming. And some people just wait. They take several weeks off and then come back. And a very hardy or foolhardy few attempt to go through, and some actually make it. But that is where the injuries happen. Seems like every year lately, someone has managed to get in real trouble. And then that requires search and rescue people to go and get themselves in real trouble to save this person.
Yeah, and that's not good. Yeah.
It's not good. And so it's a problem. Colorado is a problem. As a section hiker, though, guess what?
It is not a problem.
It is not a problem. Or is it? Because, it is, even if you wait till summer after the snow is all gone, a typical Colorado day is very thunderstormy. Every day. A typical day begins with blue skies, then it clouds up in the afternoon, then there is a deluge in the evening that lasts into the night. You'd better be in your tent in a sheltered area by early evening, because it's not just raining, there's all this lightning too. When you wake up in the morning, the skies are blue again, and everything is bone dry. This is what amazed me. It seemed like it was raining, just pouring on my tent all night, every night, and yet every morning I'd get up and everything was bone dry again. And then the cycle begins again. So that's Colorado in the summer. It's called the monsoon. This also affects New Mexico. Most people are not hiking in summer in New Mexico, but everyone is hiking in Colorado in the summer, and they experience this monsoon.
So that's where that part comes in. When you and I were originally talking, you said a good chunk of it is wet.
That's right.
Okay.
You're likely to get wet in Colorado if you're hiking during the good time. Now, I should say there's an unverified rumor that there is good weather for 2 weeks in late September in the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado. I have never been there in late September. Every time I've been there have been thunderstorms. I've tried every month, July, August, and September. So far, no luck. I'm going to try again one day.
Well, I definitely believe you. I mean, you've got 30 years with the Weather Service, so I'm going on your word. So I believe you 100%.
Yeah, well, Colorado is very rewarding, but just be ready for the weather.
Be ready and be prepared, not only mentally, but with your gear and things like that. I would recommend.
It's a great place to day hike because you can actually stay pretty dry if you're done by the afternoon every day.
Exactly. And, what better place to go on day hikes and section hikes than Colorado, with all the food and the drinks and everything else Colorado has, that I hear, because I have not. Another place I have not been. See, I'm going to leave the East Coast and do like a West. I just, CDT might be first, and then I'll make it over to the PCT kind of thing. But I never know where I'm going to end up. So, but Chris, I'm going to find you for sure. 100%.
There's some really great towns on the CDT if you want to do the town thing. I especially have good memories of Silver City, New Mexico, Leadville and Buena Vista, Colorado, Pinedale, Wyoming, Salmon, Idaho, and Helena, Montana. All very nice towns.
All right,
Lots of
people,
things to
mark
do in
those
them.
down. Yeah, mark those towns down right now and do not forget. I actually might separate those out in the show notes. Let's have a little fun here, Chris. I've never done this on the show, but just so the listeners know, before the guest and I record, we actually have a conversation, and I'll come up with the show notes. And Chris said some very interesting things to me, and I want to play a little game called Name That Trail. And these are quotes that Chris said while he and I were talking. And I want to see if he can remember the trail that he was describing. So the first one is, you said that this trail was out freaking standing, the wildest, the hardest, but easier to follow than what people think. What trail was that, Chris?
That was the CDT. It has a
Ding, ding,
reputation
ding, ding.
of
Yes,
being
you got that
barely
right.
there on the ground, but I found that it was not hard to follow at all.
Perfect. And that's good to know. That is very good to know. All right, the next one is, you said that this trail was a paradise and some of the best backcountry remote camping you have ever experienced. What was that trail?
That trail was the PCT.
Okay, at this point, I think the listeners got that based on what you said at the beginning. That I mean, we all could tell right away that the PCT, we've all got to go.
The trail is extremely well built and pretty well maintained. It has a nickname. Do you know the nickname?
I do not.
Interstate 2000.
Oh, okay.
It's trail number 2000 for its entire length. Whether it's in a park or forest or wherever. But it's built so well, and it's so easy to walk that people call it Interstate 2000.
Nice. Another good thing to know. Okay. Third one. You said that this trail gives the CDT a run for its money. This is the trail that everyone actually thinks is the CDT. All right. So what trail was that?
This is the trail everyone thinks the CDT is. They describe a trail, and they're talking about the CDT, but it doesn't describe the CDT very well. It does describe the Pacific Northwest Trail. This is a little known and recently designated National Scenic Trail that runs east-west between Glacier National Park and the Olympic Coast. It's about 1,200 miles. People describe the CDT as unfinished, with a lot of road walking and some off-trail bushwhacking. Actually, it's mostly good trail on the ground with minor road walking sections and no bushwhacking. But those qualities definitely describe the PNT.
Perfect. And the last one, you said this particular trail has surprised you and that you were shocked to know how complete the trail is. Which trail is that?
That is the Arizona Trail. It's 800 miles from Mexico to Utah. Traverses the length of Arizona. It came into the national system at the same time as the Pacific Northwest Trail, but by contrast, it's really well built. It is complete, and it's pretty easy to walk. I was pretty happy to discover that, and I wondered about that for a while, and gradually it dawned on me that there's probably nothing more mysterious other than Arizona is the state of the interior West that has the largest population. There's a big pool of volunteers to draw on for trail building and trail maintenance. In particular, Phoenix is one of the largest metro areas in the U.S., and it's right there. So I think that's probably why the AZT is in better shape than some of these other trails.
So let's talk about the AZT and the PNT real quick, the Pacific Northwest Trail and the Arizona Trail. You're currently section hiking those trails as well. So how close are you to finishing each of those trails?
I might finish the PNT this year. I do have a couple of sections left, including about 100 miles in Idaho, but I might finish it this year. On the Arizona Trail, I'm between 1/3 and a half done. I basically go there in the spring and the winter and occasionally in the fall. You don't really want to be hiking in Arizona in the summer.
No, I imagine not.
There are two other trails I'm hiking.
Oh.
More or less. Yeah, the Colorado Trail which I think
Okay.
you've probably heard of. It's 450
Absolutely.
miles, all within Colorado, Denver to Durango. I've got about 50 miles left on that, although I've had about 50 miles left on that for about the last 10 years. Just
Oh,
got to get
no.
down to that one last bit. And then there's the Oregon Coast Trail, which I'm about halfway done. This is a very interesting trail. It can be hiked in the winter. Basically, it goes right on the coast of Oregon, on the beaches and over headlands between beaches, occasionally on roads. It's very nice day hiking in winter, especially on the beaches.
Wow. Okay, Chris.
And
So
there's
sometime in the,
one
yeah.
other one. There's one other trail. I entertain the notion that one day I will walk, and that is the northern half of the Long Trail in Vermont. I think you're probably familiar with the southern half of the Long Trail in Vermont because it's
Yes, the first
coincident with the
100
Appalachian
miles.
Trail.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, I think there's like another 150 miles of the Long Trail in northern Vermont, and I may do that one of these days. I have thought about it for around 36 years now.
Well, that's a long time, Chris. So I think you've etched it in stone right here on the podcast that eventually you'll get up there, and you should do it before I leave the East Coast because I have an interest in doing that as well. So we can stop in all the towns, we can eat great food, we can stay in wonderful Airbnbs or wherever, and we can work our way up the trail. How about that?
I'm in.
I didn't have to sell you much on that, did I?
No.
All right, Chris, right before we get to your reading, I've got a true and false question for you, and you can expand on it or not expand on it. So, is this true or false? True or false that you don't actually like camping that much?
That is true. Even though I have camped more than 99% of people, I don't enjoy it all that much. If I could, I would day hike all the time, spend the nights in hotels in town with pizza and beer and steaks and hot showers.
You know what? I'm in. I'm right there with you. So we're going to do some long trail hiking. Eventually, when I get out there to the West Coast, you're going to show me around the Pacific Northwest Trail. And I just thought of something too. You could actually connect. Have you ever thought about connecting all of that, the North Country Trail? Because now the North Country Trail goes over to that junction with the AT and goes north. So you've got the North Country Trail. I think you're missing that.
I am familiar with the North Country Trail, and I have to say it does not seem near complete enough. And a lot of the country it walks through is not really country I would want to spend a lot of time in.
Gotcha.
I'm
Gotcha.
thinking
I was
about
just wondering,
North Dakota,
yeah.
Minnesota. Nice to visit, but do I want to spend a month hiking? I don't know.
I don't know. You've been through the Wind River Range, so I would probably say, yeah, you'd rather spend a month in that area, right? Or the Tetons, or
Yes, that's correct. If I had a month, I would go there. Well, I do have a month. I have every month at this point. I'm a
That's right.
retired meteorologist.
Even better. That's a better
Yeah.
meteorologist, right?
You bet.
All right, Chris, I really, really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And now I think we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
All right. So in 1989, I was actually employed by the Forest Service as a wilderness ranger in the Pasayten Wilderness in northern Washington, in the North Cascades of Washington. And I was required to keep a journal. So that's actually the only journal I have in my whole life, is the journal I was required to keep. I will now read a brief excerpt. July 24th, second ranger tour. Woke up at 6:10 and gave a fire report to Winthrop. The fire seemed to diminish during the night. Was instructed to stay at Pasayten Airfield cabin until 2 other wilderness rangers showed up. So I waited. At 10:30 a.m., a helicopter landed, and 4 guys with green flight uniforms and crash helmets alit. They gave me signs to post the Lease Creek and Tatoosh Buttes trails closed, and a fire weather kit consisting of an anemometer, sling psychrometer, and relative humidity tables. Then they flew off to videotape the fire. I posted the signs in the appropriate places and turned back 4 backpackers who were about to ascend to Tatoosh Buttes. Then I walked up the trail into the fire myself. The light became yellow as the smoke masked the sun. I entered the burn area. Trees, the ground, everything was smoking. Most of the trees had already burned, but every few minutes, a tree at the edge would have all its needles burst into flame, a crown fire. The trail was littered with fallen, burned branches, and the fire had burned both sides of the trail. My general impression was of eeriness, and I didn't feel too safe. My first forest fire.
Thanks for reading that for us, Chris, and thanks again for coming on the podcast. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Chris, and sharing your knowledge about the weather, the trails, and reminding us that hiking is supposed to be pure fun. I am looking forward to having you back on the podcast when you finish your section hiking of the Pacific Northwest Trail, Arizona Trail, and the Oregon coast. And maybe, just maybe, we can share some good old miles and food out on the long trail. Next up, we have Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer as we continue our talks about gear. Welcome back to Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer. For this episode, Steve is going to talk to us about ice axes, microspikes, and crampons. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
As always, thank you so much for having me. Always happy to be here.
Really appreciate you coming back and joining us. I first want to say, I think first and foremost, that safety in the backcountry is key. And for all the listeners out there, always please do your research, ask questions, and become familiar with the equipment, especially the equipment that Steve is going to be talking about today. And we'll just go ahead and kick this off and start with ice axes. So, Steve, when do we carry ice axes?
In the snow and ice, of course. This is actually, I speak on this topic with customers probably just as much as I do any of our other heated debates that we have about, quilts versus sleeping bags or trail runners versus boots. I actually spend a lot of time on this one, and it's kind of funny. I have people every year that will come to me and say, hey, I hiked the, Appalachian Trail last year, and I've hiked this other trail and this other trail, and I have aspirations to hike the PCT this year. And it'll be the first time ever that some of these people have ever held a ice axe in their hand or put crampons on or microspikes. And so they come to me not only for just some basic information on what size do I get, which brand do I get, how much money should I be, spending, how much does all this stuff weigh, and most importantly, how do I use it? Because a lot of folks have no clue. And this is one of those things that obviously, living in the world that I do, where I love climbing mountains during the wintertime, these pieces of gear are in my pack every single trip out. But for a lot of folks, there's only one time and one time ever that they will have a ice axe in their hand. And that is on the PCT through the higher, Sierra section, where it is 9 years out of 10, 100% necessary to have these items. So I'm really excited to talk about them. I'm really excited to help out as many folks as we can here today.
One thing that you said to me when we were talking about having this episode that I'm one of those hikers, hey, I've hiked the AT. I'm going to go out to the PCT. Oh my goodness. I need to think about an ice axe. So explaining that was perfect. So thank you for that. And you also said you got to have a proper size. Now, I just thought literally you went to the store, they were all the same size. How does that work for proper sizing for individuals?
On the PCT specifically, again, because a lot of thru hikers are some of the most weight conscious people out there, obviously, as far as how many pounds they're carrying in their pack. They don't really want to carry any extra ounces. And I have seen quite a few people that will skimp. And I guess we'll get into that in just a second. There is a difference between an ice tool and an actual ice axe. I recommend carrying the extra few ounces and having a true ice axe in your hand, especially on the years where the snowpack is still pretty thick up there. An ice axe is basically 3 different tools in one. And we're talking axe now, not ice tools. And ice axe can be used as a trekking pole. It can be used as a rock climbing or ice climbing pick, where you can, use it as a hammer and catch a hold ahead of you, where you can hammer into hard packed snow or ice or whatever, and use that to kind of pull yourself up when you can't get a good grip with your hands. And then also, most importantly, I guess you could say, an ice axe is the proper tool to have in your hand should you take a slide off the mountain and you need to arrest yourself and basically save your life. It's really difficult, almost impossible to do that in a really good manner with a ice tool as opposed to an actual ice axe. So I definitely recommend taking an axe if you're going to be up in the higher Sierra during a heavier snowpack year.
And now that you mentioned the ice tool, explain that a little bit.
Ice tools, if anyone's ever watched some of those crazy climbing videos where some of us mountaineers are up there and we're all roped in and we're climbing the side of a completely vertical wall, ice tools are the short-handled, little squiggly looking ones. The head on an ice tool looks kind of the same as what an ice axe is. It's basically just meant for your hands only. It's just a tool that you hold in your hand. It's not meant to be used as a trekking pole, walking stick. And then again, it's very difficult to use in a self-arrest situation. Just because of the way you have to get your body laid out and you have to have your hands so far apart in order to arrest yourself properly, especially if you're on a really steep grade, and you just can't do that with a ice tool. So like I said, a lot of folks will try to cheat the system, so to speak, and take just the little squiggly ice tool up there and save themselves a couple few ounces. But I definitely 100% recommend using a ice axe. Ice tools are more for ice climbing, if you're just straight up climbing ice. Not the best tool to have in the mountains on the PCT for sure.
So you do mention self-arrest. So, and I've heard this. Obviously, I've never had to do that. I do not own an ice axe. So the best way that you can explain self-arrest.
Self-arresting is when you're up high and you're coming down fast. You're coming down a snow-covered hill. A lot of times this will be like a 60 to 70 degree hill, and you're going to slide forever. Or you're going to slide till you hit the bottom or hit a rock, whatever comes first. And I can explain it the best that I can, but honestly, again, safety is key here. Safety is definitely key. There are tons and tons and tons of videos out there, whether it be YouTube or other places. I beg you, please, you can listen to what I'm trying to explain to you, but it's so much better if you can get the actual visual and see what these people do, and then go out and definitely practice it yourself before you put yourself in a situation where you might have to be using this. But really what you do is once you start sliding, you want to flip over and get on your belly as fast as you possibly can. And then you grip the head of your axe with your left hand. If you are a right-handed person, you grip the head of your axe in a certain manner, and you get that out above your head. And then you take your right hand and slide it down the shaft of the axe. And you're basically digging it into the ice or the snow and praying that you can get yourself stopped. You kind of want to get your belly up off of the ground and use your elbows and your knees to do so. It just puts a little bit more pressure on your elbows and on your knees, which in turn is putting a little bit more pressure into the snow and hopefully slowing yourself down quicker.
Perfect. I mean, I just had a true visual of this happening and trying to see myself actually doing this. But like you said, the best thing to do is become properly familiar with this equipment. Make sure you get the right thing, talk to people at outfitters. I am sure there are classes people can take on learning how to self-arrest.
Definitely.
And learning the difference between an ice axe and ice tool and how to self-arrest. That leads us to carrying, in addition to your ice axe, maybe microspikes or crampons. So the first question I have is, what exactly is the difference between a microspike and a crampon?
99 times out of 100, if you are hiking the PCT and you're up in the higher Sierra, microspike will be plenty enough. Microspike is I'm going to say Catula, which is the most famous probably microspike manufacturer out there. They've been around forever. That is what I wear, and these things are indestructible. It's kind of a really thick rubber band that has chains and 12 to 16 spikes on the bottom. These are smaller spikes. They're just little triangular pieces of stainless steel usually, and they're 3/8 of an inch thick, maybe half an inch tops. Whereas a true crampon is what you see people walking on glaciers with, or doing that same ice climbing with the ice tools. Crampons are usually 6 to 8 spikes, and those are the big, huge, beefy, damaging type spikes that you have on your feet. Those can be extremely dangerous if they're not used properly, not necessarily hurting yourself, but if you were to take a slide and you have somebody on the wall behind you, you can really cut up someone super bad with these things. They are very sharp, they are very strong, and they are extremely, extremely sturdy. But like I said, unless it is just an absolutely terrible year, crampons are usually going to be overkill for the PCT, which is a benefit to hikers in a sense, because crampons are almost always going to be heavier than your traditional microspikes are. So yeah, 9 times out of 10, microspikes will be plenty. They're cheaper, they're lighter, and they get the job done just as good. Another great thing here is microspikes can be used on just muddy surfaces or rock things, such as that. These are built to take a real true beating. If you were to try to use your crampons on rock or on mud, you're going to dull them very, very quickly, because again, these are really sharp. Microspikes are more or less rounded off. They're not so spiky, pointy. So you really want to keep your crampons on ice as much as you possibly can, because you don't want to dull them out.
And talk about the weight carrying these one versus the other. Now, obviously, there are some major differences on where you are utilizing the microspike or the crampon, but what about the weight and maybe a little bit of the sizing for both?
Sure. With sizing, these manufacturers, they go off of your shoe size. So you don't have to think you have to go get one of your pairs of boots out and have to measure it from foot to toe or whatever. If you wear a size 11 boot, a size 11 is going to be fine for you. Microspikes are a little bit more intricate in the sense that they usually come in like a small, medium, large, and it'll say right on the package, the small covers 6 through 8 and the large, whatever. So just have to look at that and pick out what size fits you best. On the other hand, crampons are usually much more universal. That's just one pair that can fit anywhere from like a women's size 5 to a men's size 13. So they are really, really universal. In that sense, there are 2 types of crampons also. There are what I call the Pro Edition and then the Strap Edition. The Pro Edition has a solid steel bar in the front. That bar is built to go into a dedicated toe welt on a pair of dedicated mountaineering boots. Again, this is not something that you'd probably be wearing if you're on the PCT. This is something that you'd be wearing if you're glacier climbing or if you're really actually out there mountaineering. I don't think I've ever met anybody that took a true pair of mountaineering boots on the PCT. Now that I've said that, my email inbox will probably blow up. But and then
I hope
the
not.
strap version. Mountaineering boots are just heavy, period. They are stinking heavy. So yeah, you definitely don't want to carry those unless you really truly are in a position. I absolutely hate putting mine on. The only good thing about putting on my mountaineering boots is I know I'm getting ready to go have some fun somewhere. So, but and then the other style of crampons would be the strap version, and the strap or the not so pro version doesn't necessarily have that steel bar that fits directly into your dedicated toe welt on your mountaineering boots. The strap version is built to fit anything. I mean, I've seen people that have crampons on with like trail runners or, anything, any kind of boot, shoes, whatever. Those are built to fit on just about anything. So much more universal in that, sense. The pro version is called the pro version for a reason. Those are usually a little bit more intricate. They're for people that really know what they are doing with them. Strap version, more or less for the everyday common type user person.
And I would say too, with, microspikes or the crampons or even carrying an ice axe, and I'll just give a personal story myself. Last year out on the Wonderland Trail, we started the Wonderland Trail July 19th. There was still snow out there in certain areas. We did ask a couple rangers, hey, when we get to the Panhandle, do you think we're going to need microspikes? And they were like, nah, you probably won't, . So, when in doubt, take them. So we wavered back and forth. Do we take them? Do we not take them? So we ended up not taking them. And that actually ended up being a bad decision. So I think it's a good time too to say, hey, when in doubt, if you are going to be in an area where there's potential snow, there's potential places that you need to put those microspikes on or carry your ice axe, do so. Don't worry about the weight. Don't let, an extra half a pound or a pound or whatever they are, deter
Right.
you
Yep.
from doing
Exactly.
that. So you want to expand on that a little bit for us?
No, I just agree with you 100%. I mean, you're talking less than a pound for a pair of Catulas. And I mean, you just really never know. I mean, I've been on not really necessarily snow, but just early morning alpine hikes where the mud has kind of frozen up a little bit. And we were out there slipping, sliding. I see people falling down, busting their butt, twisting ankles, breaking, trekking poles. And I whip out the old pair of, micro spikes, and I'm just climbing right on over them. So you just really, really never know. Any place that you might be where it might even just be slightly icy or really, really slick. Micro spikes are just like snow tires for your feet.
All right, Steve, I really appreciate you talking to us about this. I know this was a topic that you wanted to have a segment on, so I really appreciate it. Really good information, especially the differences between the ice axe, the ice tool, the differences between microspikes versus the two different types of crampons, and actually erring on the side of, yes, take this stuff with you, whether you think you need it or not, because, you never know. When you get up into the higher elevations, you never know what you're going to encounter. So really appreciate that, Steve.
Absolutely. And Julie, if I have just one more quick second, I know that we hit on it when we first started talking here. There are numerous different sizes of ice axes. And a lot of folks don't know. They always think, shorter is better because shorter is lighter. That's really not necessarily the way that things go. To properly fit yourself for an ice axe, and if you're going to be using it like a traditional ice axe should be used, as a trekking pole or as a pick to climb up the wall or as a tool to be used for self-arrest, the best way to measure yourself is to stand up straight with your feet like shoulder width apart, point your hands directly to the ground, and have somebody measure from the end of your fingertips to your ankle bone. Whatever that measurement is in centimeters is how long of a ice axe that you should be using. For reference, I'm about 6'1" tall. I use a 75 centimeter ice axe.
Perfect. Really good information to get started with. And I think it's important as we end this segment of Let's Talk Gear to really know that Steve has given us some good, valuable information. But again, you should always do your own research, visit a local outfitter, get fitted properly, and practice actually using this type of equipment before you head out into the backcountry. Once again, Steve, thanks for chatting with us and for being on every episode except for a few and being willing to be part of the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. Steve and I are going to be taking a break for the month of May from our Let's Talk Gear portion of the show, but we will be back for the first week of June with an exciting full episode of the podcast that you are most definitely not going to want to miss. On next week's episode, we feature another installment of our Entrepreneurs Inspired by the Trail series. These entrepreneurs are excited for you to hear about what they're up to in Franklin, North Carolina, and want to be known as champions of their community. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Be safe out there and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way. If you ever get lost, or if the trail leads you astray, the music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets in these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
If you're getting ready to do your holiday shopping at Sephora, Nike, or Neiman Marcus, make sure you head to Rakuten first. Rakuten helps you save big on whatever you're buying for the holidays. Getting gifts for friends and family? Get some cash back for yourself. Plus, save on festive home decor, party outfits, and that trip to see your fam. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on top of the biggest sales of the season, so you get the most savings. And it's easy to use. Just start your shopping at Rakuten.com or use the Rakuten app, and you'll get your cash back payments through PayPal or check. Rakuten partners with over 3,700 stores. The stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Join for free at Rakuten.com and get the Rakuten app. That's Rakuten.